Today I'm going to be going over the Dewalt DW735 Planer and explaining some of the features that I wish had been explained to me when I first started. And there's a lot better videos out there on some of the things that I'm going to tell you about, and you can go and look for those, but I will just introduce some of the concepts and let you know which ones have some really good videos out there, and hopefully this can get you started better than I got started myself. So just to get started, one of the things that I discovered of what a planer is and what a planer isn't is really it's just good at grinding off one face of a piece of wood and making that parallel with the other face that's opposite. So for example, there's a blade that is in this part right here. And so if I put a piece of wood in here, it's just going to plane this surface and make it parallel with the opposite surface. You can actually raise this up high enough that you can do even a side like this. You wouldn't want to do it by itself like this because it would flop back and forth. So you'll usually bond it with several other pieces and run it through that way, but we'll kind of go over that in a bit. But so that's what it's good at, is just it planes one surface. There's two rollers that are in it that will grab it and pull it through. And so that's one of the challenges, is that you'll also get what's known as snipe. You can see that there's this line right here that is where when you feed it in, once it hits the first roller, it squeezes it down a little bit, and then once it hits the second roller, there's enough of a difference that it bites into the wood just a little bit more. So this portion of the wood right here is actually just a little bit lower than the rest, and that's why there's that little transition point, and that's what snipe is. So there's a few ways. Again, you can look at other videos of how to reduce snipe, but one of the ways that you can reduce the snipe is by putting a different set of blades in there. So the blades that are normally in the system here, it has this kind of a triangle, so you can see two of the blades here, but it's just this long flat blade, and it just spins around, and it's just having basically this long knife edge that is contacting the wood. Now if you get one single nick in this blade, it will start ruining your wood every time you run it through. So if you get one nick, you have to either turn that blade, or if you've already used both faces, you'll have to replace that blade entirely. So there's another type of blade out there, and it's called a Shelix. And so that's what I've installed into this one, and I'll show you just briefly how that was installed. I've already undone the top of the unit here. It comes with this little wrench, and that fits basically most of the screws that are on this unit. And then there's these two little magnets on it, and normally if you were switching out a blade, you would undo all of the screws and then on the blade carrier, and then you'd use that magnet to actually pick up the blade and turn it around or remove it. But I've already unscrewed the top of this, so this whole top comes off. And then inside, there's this dust cover. There's actually three of these. One of them goes in here, one of them goes in the other side, and then one of them is here. And it's meant to be able to be removed by hand. So I left one of them in just so you can see. And then this actually rotates up. You can see that there's a little marking that says open and closed. This is a guard that as your blade is spinning, so this is a vacuum and it spits it out here. So this is a guard that funnels the shavings into the vacuum and blows it out. So I'll just rotate it up, move it away, and then move it. And you can see this is what a Shelix looks like. And you can see it's a helical cylinder, rather a cylinder that has the blades arranged in a helical manner. And each one of those has 4 faces. So if you get a nick, you can just rotate that, and you can do that several times before you have to even replace one of those. And the unit, the Shelix blade, actually comes with a bunch of spares. So this spins around. One of the interesting things is how much quieter this is than the other unit, because not only is the other unit have a full blade face that's just spinning and it's making noise with the air, but as it's contacting the wood, that whole face is hitting the wood. And this one, it's nibbling it because there's a whole bunch of little blades that are nibbling away. And this one actually makes it, some argue that it makes it even smoother. The board is just much smoother. So that's the blade that's inside. And you can see actually, I'll stick a blade in, or a board in here so you can see it. But you can see where the board moves past. And then when you lower the unit down, it's going to contact the board. The blades are going to contact that board. So there's a simple on and off switch. I don't have it plugged in right now. And then this is a speed that it has finishing cuts. And this is supposed to be like a faster mode. And you can see that finishing cuts does 179 cuts per inch as it's pulling it through, because remember it's got rollers that feed it in at a certain speed. And if you switch it, which this will only switch while it's turned on and running, it only gets 96 cuts per inch while it's doing that. So that's going to be a much rougher cut. And I guess if you wanted to run the wood through faster, there's a bunch of videos out there that kind of say why you shouldn't do that. And so just basically you're never going to want to switch it is the bottom line. So there's only, besides knowing a little bit about the blades, there's only 3 main features of this now that we're going to talk about. And then we'll actually talk about something, a 4th thing, which is this filtration system over here. But so the first thing to really note is that there's this part over here that's called the turret. And you can see that you can adjust this numbering system over here. There's 1, 1 1/4, and then there's 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. What this is it basically just has some spots in the bottom that correspond to the number that's different heights. And what it does is this is called the turret stop. It's just this post, and you can adjust the height. And that makes it so that if I have it set to 1, for example here, you can see that this ruler system over here, it just makes it so that when I lower it down, it will stop at a certain spot, because now this, the spot that's inside there is resting on the turret stop. It won't let it go down any farther than that. And so you can see that here it's at 1 inch. Now one of the interesting things is, you can see when it's resting on it, this won't move. So I have to back it off a little bit, and then it will move again. But you can see I can't quite get on 1 1/4, and it's because we're already below that. This is supposed to be the stopping point where it prevents it from going lower than that. And so I have to back it off even more to be able to get to that now. So let's say that I go down to 1/2. I get down to a point where now I'm hitting that stop right there. So if I back it off a little bit, I can still go to 1/4 and 1/8. I can't go up to 1 1/4 because again, we're below that already. And I can't go to 3/4 because we're already below that too. So that's all that is that's just a depth gauge that you set so that it's the lowest that you can possibly go over here. Now what this is this is a gauge that tells you how thick the wood is. There's a little piece of metal in here. You can see that the wood pushes against when you put the wood in there. And this is just showing how aggressive it's going to be. So let's take, for example, I've got this set to 1/2. And so I've got it down to the point where it's right at 1/2. And here I've got a piece of wood just from my local hardware store. And this is a 1/2 piece of wood. So let's see what it does when I stick it in here. You can see that it basically doesn't even move that little gauge. So this at most would probably take off either 0 or 1/32 inch of material. So if I set this down lower, let's set this down to 1/8. I'll put it all the way down here. Okay. So now if I stick it in, oh, you can see that I actually can't even get it in there because it's just way too low. Because this is a 1/2 inch. So what I would do at this point is if I'm sticking it in here, you can see we're at just below 1/2 inch. So this presumably is going to take off a 1/16 of an inch of material if I was to feed it through right now. And it would be very aggressive if I put it up to about the maximum that it can squeeze it down in there. This would be taking off almost 1/8 of an inch of material if I fed that through right there. And what this corresponds to, as I understand it, is it says here's the width of your wood, and this is the most that you would want to be able to take off. Presumably this could handle a 3-inch piece of wood, could handle taking off 1/8 of an inch. But if you're feeding through a 13-inch wide piece of wood, at most you would want to do so that there's only a depth of cut of 1/32. So again, this is just the depth of the cut. So if I had this, let's crank it all the way back up here to 1 inch. So you can see that since this is a 1/2 inch piece of wood, it just freely slides in there. But I've got another 1/2 inch piece of wood that makes it 1 full inch here. And you can see that, again, just the depth is really how hard this is pushing against the wood is what this is showing. So if I crank it up to about right there, again, this is, if I was to have this turned on, this would be removing about 1/8 of an inch of material from the top face of this wood. Because I have 2 pieces of wood put together, it's not even going to touch the bottom piece. It's only going to remove 1/8 of an inch of material from this top face. So one of the things that you would want to consider, let's say that I want to get this 1/2 inch piece to be 1/4 of an inch instead. So I'm going to set this to 1/4 of an inch. That's the thickness I'd want. And then I'm just going to run this through several times until it starts removing material. And then again, presumably, this isn't super precise, every 1/4 turn of this handle right here lowers down the whole entire mechanism by a 1/16 of an inch. So every 1/4 turn, you're removing a 1/16 of an inch. So if I wanted to get this down to 1/4 of an inch, I would run it through and then lower this down probably a 1/4 turn. And then if you wanted to do the other side, you would want to keep switching sides so that you're not just running it through on the same side until you get down to the proper height, because then only one side will be planed down and looking nice, and the other side will still be really rough, even though now you're down to the thickness, the desired thickness. So we've covered the turret stop, how fast it feeds it through, and how many cuts per inch it does because of the speed that it's pulling it through those rollers. We've covered what this is. This is basically just how hard the blade is being pushed against the material, and that indicates how much material is going to be removed during that pass. We've covered the wheel and shown that as you crank it up and down, you can measure it and see what the presumable height is right here. Now, there is something, and again, this is another video that there's a bunch of great videos that cover this. But you notice that if you look here at the gauge here, it really depends on what angle you are looking at it. So if I look at it from this angle, it looks like 1 inch. If I look at it from this angle, it's definitely above 1 inch. So that's called parallax. And so you always have to look at it straight on to get an accurate measurement. But they do make digital readouts. And so that's an option that you can get. This one is one of the more popular ones at the time of this recording, is a Wixie. And so there's no parallax because you just look at the display and you're not trying to look at this physical edge right here. So what you have to do is you need to find some wood of a known depth here. And so these two are 1/2 inch. You might want to check that with a gauge or something like that, so that you can be sure just how accurate it is. And then you're going to set this, your gauge or this edge right here, against the ruler so that it matches the thickness of the wood once you've pressed onto it. And then you're going to set your turrets to that same depth, and then you're going to set your turret stop so that you make sure that as you're cranking this down that it stops exactly, in this example, at 1/8 of an inch. So you want to make sure that this matches this, which is set by the turret stop, and that matches the thickness of your material that's inside. So that's the stuff that really wasn't explained in any video that I found, was especially how to adjust calibrate the turret. I didn't see any videos that explained what the turret stop was or how that worked. There wasn't a really good explanation of even what this did. Like, I thought that this was directly related to this somehow. But, so again, the other big thing is how to install a Shelix if you want that, and if it's going to be worth it to you. I personally think that it's very worth it. And so the last thing I think that I'll kind of cover is this filtration system that's over here to the side. Basically, I've got a Home Depot bucket over there, and you can get this on Amazon or from other places, but it's a cyclone that, just like the old coin sorters, if you're familiar with those, anything that is heavier than a certain weight will drop down into the bucket as it cyclones around. So only the finest of particulates will go up and go actually to your vacuum. So this keeps you from just filling up your vacuum over and over and over again. The larger material dumps into this bucket, and then you can take and just dump that out. You would be absolutely shocked if you just are even removing enough material just to plane down a rough piece of wood so that it's a nice smooth piece of wood. That bucket over there on just a piece of wood that's this thick, this wide, if you're removing just enough material, like just the smallest fingernail of material here, it will fill up half that bucket. It's just so much. So very worth it. One of the things that I would caution is that as it's spinning that material around, it generates a lot of static electricity. I saw a guy who went to unhook it and he got shocked and his finger was completely white. There was no blood in it. He said it hurt like crazy. So you can see there's actually this little green wire right here. I have a grounding wire that hooks to the ground when you plug this in. That's how I just hook that in, but you want to ground that if you're going to be using one of those. But highly recommend that. You can see that there's a special attachment that you can get that allows you to hook a vacuum hose up to it. So we've covered how to remove the top, what the dust cover is, and that it's got some screw downs for that so that you can get in there if there's a need to clean in there or access the blades. That's how you do that. We've covered the turret stop, the feed speed, the depth gauge of how much bite it's going to take out. We've talked about snipe, and again, you can find some videos that can tell you how to reduce snipe. And we've talked about what this gauge is right here, and again, how to walk it down to the thickness. So you might start at 1 inch and walk it down until you get down to like 1/2 inch or whatever. You're just removing material until you get down to what that is set to. And you can even, if your material is 2 inches thick and you want to remove 1 inch of it, as long as that's below 1 inch and you just stop at 1 inch over here, that doesn't really matter. That's just the maximum that it will allow you to go down before it stops the machine. So that's just like a backstop. So that doesn't directly affect this, other than that it sets the bottommost limit. So you can go anywhere in between, all the way down to whatever that is set to. So some people will just set that down to the lowest setting and then just do their depth over here and not even worry about that. And you can do that, and that's okay. So hopefully this was informational to you. These were some of the things that I did not understand when I was getting started with using a planer. Again, all that it does is it planes it to be perpendicular to the opposite face of the wood. Another thing that you should keep in mind is that if you have any cupping or twisting of your wood, when it pinches it between those rollers, it'll flatten out that cup. So this does not remove cupping or twisting. That's what you would use a joiner for. And you need to be extra careful. So I had a piece of cedar that had some cupping, and when it squeezed it between those rollers, it just snapped the middle there. So it flattened it out, but it caused it to split. So some of the things to consider and to watch out for, and hopefully you enjoy using your planer.